The conversation you're about to hear today on the Media Roundtable is the first time we've released the uncut conversations that became the short series, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Baritone One and host of the Media Roundtable podcast. We're giving you the full-length version of specific conversations we had with about 30 of the leaders of podcasting today. That includes creators like Ira Glass, Guy Raz, so many others, as well as leading publishers, advertisers, and thought leaders, where we tried to sit around the table and debate what is a podcast, why does it matter, why'd you get into this to begin with, and what do we need to do to preserve that into the future as we build a bigger definition of what podcasting actually is. Some of these conversations are a snapshot of a very specific moment in time, but they're all durable and timeless in the importance of the conversation. I learned a lot. For me, this whole project was a love letter to podcasting and something that is able to blend real business value with the passion that brought me and so many others into this field. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. So with that, please enjoy this next installment of the full-length interview series, What's a Podcast? Welcome to the Media Roundtable. I'm your host, Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Baritone One. The Media Roundtable is, as always, in service of the Chief Audio Officer, but we don't just talk about monetization. We really try to use this from time to time as a platform for the industry to come together and have a discussion about things that will impact the marketing community downstream, but may have more to do with just the governance and the way forward of how we're doing business. Obviously, we've spent a lot of time on the brand safety topic in the past, but now we're in new territory as the industry, specifically the podcast industry, not just audio, but podcasting, is going through a lot of changes, and a lot of those changes have to do with distribution, the increase of expectation for video, and there are a lot of implications of that. And I think that this is an important time for those of us that care about this industry and maybe make a living around it, to work together to really try to address that issue and figure out what is this thing and how do we want to define it, and what was it, and what do we want it to be going forward. And so we're having a series of these discussions, and we're trying to talk to really the who's who that have really been involved in this business and understand not just what the podcast industry is of the last couple of years, but really going back to the origins of why it was such a force of nature in media. And to do that, I have a very special old friend joining today. His name is Lex Friedman. We're going to go hard on the Friedman piece. It is, I'm sorry that this has to become part of your identity, Lex, but you know
I do.
that this is just something that we need to spell out for people. This is actually the original Lex of podcasting, to the extent that I knew this man more than a decade ago when he had his own network that was actually called Podlexing. So
An incredible name.
An incredible name. Yeah, the genius. I mean, they didn't have like the like rap creator names that could do it for you. You had to do this all, I mean, by hand. But anyway, like, just to establish some of your credentials here, you were in the game long before any of the other Lexes came into the picture, and I think you deserve credit for that. But really, as a creator, as a producer, as an executive, as a consultant, you've been in really every corner of this space, and I think it's really, because you have been so involved in it from some of the biggest players and in some of the rooms where it happened. I think it's important for you to weigh in on this conversation. So, Lex, I'm glad you're with us today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I had checked before we started, and our first email exchange was in June 2013. So we have known each other for some time.
That is a month before we actually launched the agency. That's amazing. That is amazing. Well, and so I'm just going to go even deeper on your bio before we actually get into the meat of the issue here, because it's important and it's so extensive and impressive, frankly. Lex was head of podcast strategy at Wondery. and then head of podcast partnerships at Amazon. So already one of the consequential organizations in this industry. He was the chief revenue officer at Art 19, and he was the chief of business development at Midroll. And if you don't remember Midroll, that's really like ground zero for where all this started. Midroll came out of Earwolf, which I remember talking to Jeff Ulrich, who was the founder of that in probably 2011, 2012. And he was one of the first guys to go all in building a network. He saw it ahead of the curve. And I had a job at the time and I went to see him and I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of doing some of this on the side and it's going pretty good. And he's like, you can't do this part time. Like you're in or you're out on podcasting, right? But like that became Midroll, which became Stitcher, which went into Sirius, which combined with Pandora. And now like these little kernels of these organizations that you've been a part of, Lex, have really shaped what it is today. Now you have your own daily podcast, which is special, where you get to talk about things like your college a cappella experience. And most importantly, something you should know about Lex is that one of his creations is Sorkin It, which many of you probably know about. Sorkin in It was a podcast about Aaron Sorkin projects. So you've really, I'm trying to figure out what you haven't done. But I am a supporter of your Weird Al for President campaign, and you're a man of many parts. That's the least I can say about Lex Friedman.
I'm impressed by the research that goes into this. That Weird Al for President site, that was a parody of the Alta Vista website, which obviously no longer exists. And I think that was from like 1995 or 1996. So I'm very impressed.
I think it was a good call. I've been a lifelong admirer of his, and I think he'd be an excellent commander in chief, and maybe just what the country needs right about now.
You're not wrong.
Anyway, hey, let's get into it. You've been messing around with this industry for a long time. Why did you get involved? What drew you in?
My whole career had been working at startups. I was working at MySpace before that was a big thing, and then I had a diet tracking startup before iPhones existed, and so I kept working at startups. And through dumb luck and timing, as much as anything else, they kept getting acquired. And so after I had gone through a couple different acquisitions, I decided I was going to take a passion job. And so I took a full-time job as a writer for a publication called Macworld, writing about Macs and iPhones and iPads. And it was my first time not working at a startup. So when a friend of mine said, "Hey, do you want to co-host a podcast with me?" I was like, "Sure, I have free time now. I'm working 9 to 5, not 27 hours a day." And we were on a network that doesn't exist anymore. But that network, a couple weeks in, sent us an ad to read. I'm sure it was for Squarespace. It was either Squarespace or
What
Google.
was it? Hold on. What was the network?
It was called Mule Radio.
I remember Mule Radio.
And so Mule had these ads for us, which I was excited about. I hadn't known we were doing ads. I hadn't known we were getting paid. I just knew we were making the show. And then after several weeks of ads in a row, they didn't have an ad. And so I said to them, "Hey, do you care if I try to sell ads for the show?" And of course, they didn't mind. I had absolutely no ad sales experience, which I'm sure you detected when we first started talking.
Indeed.
All those years ago. But I basically, it was a combination of a couple things. I loved the idea of, I've never been a big radio fan personally, but I love the idea of being able to pick what shows I could listen to and when I was listening to them. And then I love the idea of making money for talking. That sounded quite fun to me. And then when I could start to suddenly help other friends with their podcasts make money too, that just felt great. And I never thought of myself as a salesperson. I always thought of myself as an entrepreneur. And the entrepreneurial muscle I was flexing was the sales muscle. I mean, you know as well as I do, the exciting part of selling podcast ads in the early 2013, 14 era was these ads really worked. Like it's very refreshing to sell a thing, to sell advertising especially, that works for everybody. It worked for the advertiser, it worked for the show because the creator wanted to make this art, whatever their show was, and could only do so because there were ads, and the listeners wanted the show for free and they could only have that because the ads existed. So I considered it the rare win-win-win. So I found all of that very exciting.
Well, and we shared that in common. You know, I did have the background in radio selling advertising, and I was a commission seller. And so if it didn't work, the customer went away. And these were all local businesses we were working with, and they depended on the return on investment. So it was life or death for the business owner. And it took me 10 years to build a book of business, to kind of grind through and find campaigns that were going to be successful over time. When I started proactively bringing the same advertisers to podcasting, just for relativity, took about 90 days to build the same volume of business because it worked so well. And that was part of I mean, like you said, it was a revolution from a content standpoint, and it was a revolution. It was a real renaissance for monetization. The endorsements from recognizable people became accessible to all. I mean, the democratization that it brought in the marketplace as well as in the marketplace of ideas, I think is, part of what was really special in those early days. So so we're talking 2012, 2013, and you're playing around first as a creator, and then you figured out monetization. When did you know that there was a business here that could be a full-time job for you?
So we can blame Jeff Ulrich for my entry there as well. I was doing it, I had the full-time job still. So nights and weekends I was selling ads for podcasts, and it eventually became all consuming. My first 12 months, I was doing it just as a hobby, and I grossed like $500,000 and still was learning what I was doing as I was doing it. And I decided I either have to stop doing this because it's taking all my nights and weekends, or I have to start doing it full time. Jeff and I were two of maybe 8 people in the world selling podcast ads at any scale at that point. So we were unsurprisingly introduced by multiple people. And he brought me in as a co-founder as he was getting ready to launch Midroll. And so I joined. Initially, I think I was the EVP of sales, which was hilarious because it was like a 7-person company. And then eventually it was the chief revenue officer. And then, like you said, later the chief business development officer. But it was all about how can we bring
You're
in
the head of a
shows and
bunch of
ads.
stuff. Yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
That was
yeah.
very important. The important thing was very important. Very
Well, and he kind of rode off into the sunset very shortly thereafter. I mean, he was maybe like the first exit
yes.
of note, right? I mean, who was it that he sold to? Was it?
We sold to EW Scripts.
Yeah.
So EW Scripts bought Midroll, and then EW Scripts acquired Stitcher a year later, and we rebranded the whole company as Stitcher, the whole Midroll company. And then I was there a total of 7 years, and after I left was when they did the second sale to Sirius XM.
Okay. And staying on that early period,
Yeah.
one of the things I remember, and I'm wondering if you too, is how often we'd be talking to a business about advertising in these things, and we would need to answer the question, what's a podcast? Because they really didn't know. Was
It's
that something you dealt with on a regular basis?
every day.
Every
So
day.
for years, every sales conversation had to launch with "What's a podcast?" A couple years into it, we had to switch to people had heard of Serial,
Yeah.
and so we could talk about did they think Adnan Syed was guilty or not. And then a few years after that, they all had their favorite podcasts. But yeah, the
Yeah.
first couple of years were explaining what podcasts were. Jeff and I were both very specific that we did not want to have any deck with us when we were going into a meeting to pitch an advertiser, because we said it's an audio medium, so we're going to talk about it. And the thing that we needed to have more than any visual was listen to this. Like here's what a podcast sounds like, and here's what a podcast ad can sound like, and that was how we sold it.
And as you moved along in your career, did you stay with the no deck policy, or did you end up integrating the deck?
I would say for many years, if I were going into a meeting, I did not have a deck with me. Once we had a sales team, my sales team wanted decks.
Right.
And so eventually we had a deck, and as the team grew and we brought in the great Corey Colessa as our chief revenue officer, and she was leading that team, like they all had decks to use. But still, I would say the vast majority of everybody's pitch was verbal because that's the medium.
Well, and I think that I think that says a lot about the evolution of the industry, right? Is that it kind of started pretty pure audio, and now there are visual elements that at least support, and what we're trying to figure out is to what extent. But when you would be in those meetings pre-serial and you're trying to explain what this thing that you're even talking about is, what was the answer? What was a podcast at that time as you defined it?
I would talk about it. I would always use the talk radio comparison because that's the thing that people know and understand. But I would talk about it like it's talk radio on demand. And that was really the crux of it to me. It's whatever topics you can find a podcast on, and it's you listen to it when you want to listen. The analogy that I ended up using, or the story that I ended up using the most when I was explaining podcasting, traced back to, of all people, Rosie O'Donnell, because I remember there was a time when we were pitching Rosie on doing a podcast, and she's like, "Great, I want to do a 3-hour show 5 days a week." And I was like, "Why on earth would you want to do that? That's crazy." And she said, Well, that's what I do on the radio. That's what I do. I guess it was on Sirius XM at the time.
Yeah.
And so that's what I should do in my podcast. And I was like, no, we'll see. The difference is when people listen to your radio show, they're listening for, 18 minutes while they drive to work, and that's it. Like they're dipping in and dipping out. So of course you have to go for that many days and that many hours. But podcast listeners are completionists. That's a big crux of what makes this whole medium work for advertisers. So getting to tell advertisers that.
Completionists. What does
Yeah.
that mean?
They listen to just about every episode, and they listen to just about all of every episode, which is pretty much the opposite of how people listen to talk radio when it's terrestrial or satellite radio.
And do you believe that that's true today as it was then?
100%.
Rosie, is it possible that she was actually onto something as proven by Joe Rogan?
I never know the correct way to use the expression, the exception that proves the rule, but Joe Rogan is, I would say, an outlier in multiple ways, including that one. I think, there isn't a lot of room for more shows like that. When a show's, I think as a rule, many podcasts are too long. And it's easy, and many shows get longer over time, especially chat show style shows. But listeners have a finite amount of time in the day and a finite appetite. When you go to subscribe to a new show and you see it's doing 3-hour episodes, if it's doing more than one of those a week, the barrier for you to choose to follow that show gets pretty high. But if you see it's a show that releases once a week and it's a half an hour, a tight 30 that you can fit into your schedule, that's a much easier add-on for an active listener.
Well, and so why do you think it was so much more? I mean, you were talking about like it just worked like crazy for the advertiser, right? And it was kind of good for everybody. But what do you think it was that made it so unique?
Well, and I know you come from radio, like you said, so I mean no disrespect to the medium. When you haven't been,
there's a reason I left, right?
But you're in your car and you're listening to terrestrial radio, and an ad comes on. Almost everybody I know does, including my wife to this day, who is not a podcast listener, is jab at the preset buttons to get to the next song or the next station. It's really, really easy to avoid and ignore those ads. And they're always an interruption. And I think that what made podcasting so special was, again, it spoke to people's completionist tendencies, the same way that binge watching series on streaming services does. And you didn't skip to the next show because an ad came on. You were listening to that show. And yes, we all know that there are increasingly in every podcast app, there's some button to try to skip through the ads, but especially when it's a host read ad, especially when it's a host who can instill their personality into that ad read, it's worth listening to. It's obviously advertising versus editorial, but it's still content. It's still fun to listen to, especially if the host is having a fun time doing that ad read. And I think those things combined, right? It's an ad that's not annoying or abrasive to listen to, and it's a show that I'm going to listen to all of anyway. So those things really made it so effective for the advertising perspective. And then just the fact that you could pick and choose exactly what you listen to and when, it's how we consume every other piece of content and entertainment that we consume. So of course it made sense to happen in spoken word audio too.
So here we are a dozen years later. What's changed in the business? And I know what hasn't changed might be a better question, but in your view, I mean, I think you've really seen all sides of it. What do you think are the major changes?
There's 3 things that come to mind right away. One is obviously the dominance of the giant companies in the space across all sides, across your side of the industry, but also all the networks and the distributors. Like there's a handful of companies that you and I could both rattle off in a few seconds that control the vast majority of podcast inventory and that have the vast majority of the gigantic shows. Because there's all those gigantic companies in the space, it's so much to me like early blogging was, where there was a time when everybody could and often did have a blog, and then a select few, like Ariana Huffington, could become really financially successful at it. And most of them were just for hobbyists at that point. We're seeing something similar happen in podcasting, but because there's so much money or so many giant companies, there's so much money being spent. The offers that go to talent for some of the biggest shows in the world, when you think about Conan or Smartless or Dax or Office Ladies or Call Her Daddy, these companies are spending gargantuan amounts. That was my job at Amazon, was to spend those gargantuan amounts. I spent something like $500 million of Amazon's money on minimum guarantees to different hosts. And it all came with free shipping, at least. But he didn't think that joke was funny, everybody, but I tried. But many of those deals don't make any sense, right? Like many of those deals are in theory loss leaders, or the idea is this way we can have some exclusivity. Spotify used it as a way to grow audience for a while, which I think worked for them. Like they got more podcasts listening on the platform, but that's one other big change. And then the third is that this is host-read podcast ads are a tough thing to scale. That was true at Midroll 13 years ago. And it's true for all these companies now. And so you find all of them. You think about Wondery, and I wasn't there at the beginning with Wondery, but it started out as we're making our own shows. And then, hey, we've built this ad sales team to sell ads on our own shows. Let's sign up third-party shows. That's a very familiar pattern. And now we can sell ads on all these shows. But when you go from a dozen to 50 to 150 to 250 shows, It's a really difficult thing to scale because now you need a sales team that can speak to every single host and every single show and all of its demographics as they're pitching an advertiser. And that's hard to know for that big a roster. And then you have 250 hosts to wrangle, and they've got to record ads. Maybe they've got to get them vetted by the advertiser ahead of time. It's a very manual, labor-intensive, error-prone process. So what you're seeing, especially at all these big companies, and you know this well, is a very strong push to do as much pre-produced, programmatic, and pre-recorded spots as possible, which is a mixed bag. It certainly helps things scale more. It certainly helps smaller shows that maybe don't merit a host read by or can't get a host read by. It's a way for those shows to monetize. But the bummer is, in my experience, those pre-produced spots also don't work as well.
I'm glad to hear you say it. I think we had to have some of those conversations over the years because that was, I agree with you. Necessity kind of forced it on everybody, right? It was like, you can't just do the one, right? But I felt like something was dying when everybody over course corrected and everything became like, and they're just trying to turn it into a jukebox. They're turning it into radio, right?
Right.
And there's a reason we left from 20 minutes of ads per hour and kind of we found this beautiful new land, and then it just, then they put up the Starbucks and the Walmart, and it was like, what the hell happened, right? And we used to talk about like the gentrification of podcasting, and I think that was a big piece of it. But I do think there has to be some balance going forward, right? Like, did you see our Podload report, or what we submitted to the market as the Oxford clock?
Yes.
Interested if you have a view, good, bad, or otherwise. Happy for you to, challenge.
You were referring to ad loads, correct?
Yeah, we basically, just to recap, what we concluded was, all right, we know that the publishers have to maximize their yield. They have to figure out what's the maximum number of ads that we can run until the listeners scream, right? And the advertisers go away, or they actually care, right? And I think, one of the challenges in podcasting is not a challenge for me, but challenge for those that are trying to get out of it, is that they want the direct response to go away very badly. So people will not hold them accountable for the, how deeply the ads are resonating with the audience, right? That's how you maximize. So it all, most new mediums, they start with all DR and they kick out the DR folks as best they can. And they bring in brands that aren't really tracking. Anyway, sorry, getting back to the clock, we recognize there needs to be some balance thereof, but we actually did a study on where's the point of diminishing return for the advertiser so that the ad isn't having the same effectiveness. And we found that about 6 minutes an hour is about what a podcast can tolerate on average before you start to see that degradation. So we say, okay, well, how do you maximize 6 minutes an hour? And we say, well, we think we need to have a 60-second break up top, 60-second break at the end, and two mid-rolls in the middle. But each of those mid-roll breaks should only be 2 minutes. And you've got a live read in each of the four, but then you've got 2 minutes of discretionary time in the middle that you can traffic your programmatic. We think that's the right formula because you get higher unit rate on the live read, and you can still, backfill with programmatic if you have to. But that was our thesis. We have had publishers tell us that actually has informed how they're now structuring their clocks, because it's not like radio where there were like governing policies for all shows. This is something we're able to make work. So, but interested in if you have a point of view.
I do.
How we can make that more successful.
I mean, it's fascinating to me because we come to very similar conclusions, even though I think we get there in different paths. But yeah, I mean, for me, you mentioned it per 60 minutes. When I'm wearing just my monetization hat and somebody's talking to me about how should they set up a show and its ad load, I like a show to be around 42 minutes or longer to support the ad load you're describing. You talked about it as 60 minutes, but to me, once it hits that 42-minute mark, then I can do 2 30-second pre-rolls up top. That's your minute there, potentially. Post-roll a minute at the end, maybe 2 more there. And then, like you said, 2 breaks of 2 minutes each of which can hold up to 2 ads total, somewhere in that middle.
So we get to the exact same place and didn't even collaborate on that. Okay, good. That's very good validation. Yeah.
It's a real... I was gonna say it's a real bummer. I guess it's a bummer. I'm not gonna give it the adverb. It's a bummer to me to hear even some of my favorite shows. And I mean, I don't work for anybody. I can name names.
Yeah.
But for a long time, iHeart, I think, stood alone in really buffing up its ad loads to be, I think, pretty aggressively high. And like you said, and I'm sure at the expense of ad efficacy, right? The more ads there are, the easier it is for you to skip through them because it's annoying. And so you pay less attention. So the ads work less well over time.
Yeah.
But I'm noticing even on other networks, a pretty steady increase. You'll see it especially in shows that get giant deals announced, like in Hollywood Reporter or Variety. Suddenly, those shows, after they've gotten their 9-figure guarantees, uh, they'll do like 3 pre-rolls at the top and then 2 breaks with 3 mid-rolls each and then a couple of post-rolls. And those ads can't be working as well. And maybe by tonnage, and if they can keep the prices high, it's working out okay on a revenue side. But I'm a listener and I'm in the space, and I press the 30-second skip button when I get to a 3-minute ad break in SmartLess.
Okay, so this is one of the challenges that I think we face today. And you talked. The first thing you mentioned was kind of the dominance of the few. The power has shifted very much. It was a very independent, insurgent medium with a bunch of little islands that you couldn't really have any structure over, which I think was also limiting for growth, right? So there's benefits, but what's your cost benefit analysis on the consolidation?
I think what's most fascinating to me about the consolidation is how it was almost always the same. Like, no company thought, let me just get a maker of shows. They said, let me get a maker of shows plus an ad sales arm, plus a hosting platform. And they put all those pieces together. Amazon did it with Wondery and with Art19. SiriusXM has Simplecast and Stitcher. And you saw that pattern happen, I would think, over and over again. It makes sense if you're a giant company and have the money to spend. I do think in some cases we saw significant overspending on some of those assets for some of these acquisitions.
Yeah, it would seem so.
But it's from those companies' perspective to get a big foot in the door to be part of the podcasting space. I get it. It makes sense for them. It's an interesting area to expand. It's still like when I think about Wondery and Art19 at Amazon, places where I've worked. I got to Amazon because they acquired Art19. And companies that I have a lot of affection for, there's still a rounding error to just Amazon Music where they roll into, and then that's under Amazon Entertainment, which is still not by any stretch the biggest part of Amazon, right? But Amazon is, much like Google and much like Meta, a business that makes a ton of money from advertising. And when you see these companies make those acquisitions, they're clearly all thinking about, we can scale this, right? We can take this and make it way, way bigger. And then, like we just talked about it a couple moments ago, the ways you do that are not necessarily great for the industry. So right. I think it's been good for creators, particularly already famous, already successful creators who can get these gigantic deals. I think certainly from a listener perspective, there is a real benefit, right? To these companies having mass distribution, never a question about can they make payroll, the ability to make tons of sales so these shows can keep existing. From a listener's perspective, the fact that they can still have these shows they love, that's good. Whether it has longevity the way that it's been set up today is a bigger question to me, because it's not that I've seen like a rush of shows ending, but I have certainly seen shows that are putting out fewer episodes than they used to, or frankly just have hosts who sound less enthusiastic than they used to.
Have you ever heard of any of these companies? Shopify, Bayer, Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John, LegalZoom, Constant Contact. We could go on, and we could go on so much further now that we're joining forces with our friends at Veritone One. We have created the world's largest specialist agency in audio and in podcasting. Nobody's ever done anything like this before, and it's an exciting opportunity for everybody involved. What we do at this agency is we offer comprehensive services for brands that are looking to break out and be successful in this space. We call you the chief audio officer because we believe that what you need requires real specialist work. And the way that we approach it includes proprietary methods in media planning and buying, analytics and attribution, insights. We have a proprietary process called Audiolytics, which is our trademark method for creative development that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. Audio isn't just the work that we do, it truly is our passion, and we aim to elevate this industry to new heights. And that's why we're the leaders in brand safety and suitability, as well as in volume in the space. We try to provide solutions that ensure that your ad buys align your values that you have as a brand with your business metrics that you need to be successful. This stuff is hard, but we're here to make it a little bit easier for you. And if you're a chief audio officer seeking best in market performance at maximum viable scale, please get in touch with us. Do the right thing. Go to oxfordroad.com. And if you're passionate about audio, if you're strategic, if you're relentless, and you're looking for a career change, consider joining our mission as an agent of influence. Send us your resume through our website, oxfordroad.com. We made it really easy to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer, and be sure to mention that you heard about us right here on the Media Roundtable podcast, because attribution is important. Thanks, everybody. Do you think if you were doing, go back to the podlexing days, would that have a better chance, more success in growth of audience and monetization today than you did then? Or has the opportunity contracted as the industry's grown?
So I like this question. Many years ago, when I joined Midroll, a buddy of mine from the Apple nerd space, a guy named Brent Simmons, published an article. I don't know if it's still online, but his headline was something like a Lex-sized hole, that my leaving independent and joining big company, wasn't that big a company at the time, but that there had been left a Lex-sized hole in the industry. And I think it's as true today as it was then. And his point was, there isn't somebody who's focused on indie shows that don't have the massive audiences that some of these bigger networks can amass. As you mentioned, I now do full-time consulting, and I have a couple clients who are in the space of focusing on the not monster shows, and that's a real business. And it's very, so I think there is plenty of opportunity to sell ads against shows that aren't Office Ladies, Smartless, Conan, Joe Rogan size. It's harder in some ways because you're not necessarily on everybody's must-buy list. You don't necessarily get every RFP, and there's a certain certainly not the Oxford one or Veritone one way, but Oxford Road or Veritone one way. But
We're still figuring it out.
there are still a lot of ad buying agencies who want to do what they think is the easiest thing or the simplest thing or the thing that they've already done. That's what made it hard to sell podcast ads at all in the beginning. And now they're like, we know these networks, or we know these shows, or we've heard of Spotify, so we're going to spend there. And so when you are one of these, I don't even call them upstarts because some of them have been around for a while, some of them are new. But when you look at a company like Realm or True Native or Q Code, they are big names to us in the industry, but many buyers haven't heard of them yet. And there's only a couple ways these companies can differentiate, right? Here's my shows, and you can only buy my shows from me. And then here's how well I can serve you, right? Here's how good my ads are. Here's how good my customer service is. And I think that if you're good at those things and you can have a manageable, scalable network of hosts, there's still a real business there. It's just, I think it's harder than it was then, but maybe even more needed than it was then.
Okay, so let's get to the billion-dollar question here. What is a podcast in 2025, and how should the industry define itself? And I want to leave space for not just, kind of a forced definition of the question, but also, your perspective may be like some people that say we shouldn't have a definition. We need to stop using that term, right? So what do you got?
I have a different answer from both of those things. I think, I don't think that words going anywhere. People call them podcasts. People are going to keep calling them podcasts. Every name that people have tried to float as an alternative podcast hasn't gone anywhere. That's not how language works. I was a linguistics and cognitive science major 1,000 years ago at Brandeis University.
Wow.
And so my other part of it, I'll give you an answer to what I think a podcast is, but I think it's an exercise for us, right? I know that's part of the point of what you're doing, right? Is let's define podcasting for the industry, but it really means whatever it means when people use it, when people say it, because that's how language works, right? France has an agency, a government agency that tries to dictate what words should mean and what words they can take on from English, and it doesn't work that way, right? People hear the words and they start using them, and that's how it is.
Well, I mean, now we're in some deeper waters, but I like it. So is it true that the people truly do define words, or are there not times that governments or businesses end up defining them for you? So, and I think in this use case, I think one of the big things that's happened, I'll give you three big things that have happened that are kind of creating this collision, which is one, Spotify changed Spotify for podcasters to Spotify for creators. So they've already started pushing the language in a different direction. And meanwhile, Google's CEO is talking about podcasting on his investment calls, and there's now news coming out about Netflix getting into podcasting, whatever podcasting happens to mean to them. But it makes you think, like, what if the three of them all agreed that they weren't going to call it podcasting and they're going to call it something else? Can they not brand it into the market? Can the government not define things and legislate in certain ways that we get boxed into a word and a definition? Or is it really for the consumers to decide?
I think it's, in linguistics, they talk about prescriptivist versus descriptivist philosophies. And I won't go too nerdy on it, but basically, are you describing how people use the words, or are you telling them what to use? Literally had a meaning for a really long time. It meant this is the actual thing. Like, I am literally talking to you right now. But obviously, 99% of the world today uses literally to mean exactly what it used to be the opposite of, figuratively. I am literally so hungry I could eat a horse. No, you're not. But linguists would typically look and say, okay, that's what literally means now. That's how language evolves. So the word means how people use it. What if I were going to define podcasting, which I'm going to, since you asked me to? I think of it as, I've been wrestling with, do I want to include short term in there or not? Short form in that description or not? But
it's a big question. It's a big question.
Yeah, but I think of it as on demand audio programming. That's it. That's all I think of it as. I don't go deeper than that. And there's I can't think of what the word is, but there's a thing that happens in language sometimes where what used to be the word now has to. A great example is like acoustic guitar. A guitar used to mean acoustic guitar, but then we invented electric guitars, so we had to backfill the word acoustic guitar so you knew what kind of guitar we were referring to. That's a common phenomenon in language. You're also kind of asking about the Kleenexing, right? Kleenex, magic markers, other things that are brand names, Xerox, that become words that we just basically use, and then they have to Google. They have to vigorously defend those trademarks if they don't want to lose them. But I don't think the word video podcast is going away. I almost never hear anybody talk about, oh, I love this podcast that's a YouTube distributed podcast, without putting the word video in front of it. And terrestrial radio is another great example of that phenomenon I'm talking about. It used to just be radio, but then once satellite radio existed, we had to have terrestrial radio as a word, so you knew which one we were referring to. So I think of podcasting more than anything else as on-demand spoken word audio. And the fact that there can be video components of it, great. Video podcasting is fine. I really struggle. I talked about this on another podcast recently. I really struggle with what I think is a misinterpreting of the information in front of us about how people feel about video podcasts. I don't think people consume YouTube content the same way they consume audio. I love podcasts as audio because I can listen to them at times when I do not have the ability to watch a video. I'm driving my car, or I'm doing work around the house. I'm, working out and not able to stare in one place the whole time. I cannot watch a video in those situations, or I would crash my car or drop weights on myself. So I appreciate that there's an audio only medium. I want to meet my audience where they are. So if somebody wants to experience my show on YouTube or whatever Spotify's video distribution thing is, great. I would love for them to be able to access my show. I don't think that the listening behavior is the same. I think that, people get very focused on the video component, but I'm hard pressed to believe that most people are watching all 3 hours of a Joe Rogan video. I think they're putting it in the background of their screen while they're doing other work. And I think that true audio listening is a more attentive practice than the backgrounding of video content that people also do.
Sorry, on the Rogan thing, that's an important point. Is there any research on that you've seen?
No, it's really just
I don't disagree. Take. I mean, look, I'd probably second that take. I'd just love to see a third party look at it because it should be knowable, right? Like that. Right. That's something we could figure out.
YouTube probably doesn't want you to know because YouTube doesn't want to say, yeah, we get put in the background a lot, because when there's a visual component to ads that they're selling, they mean less.
And I mean, can you imagine if YouTube would report, if Google would report the revenue that comes from programming that they file as podcasting, right? We might not be capped at this $2 billion number that the IAB has decided we're going to stay at for a while. So like even getting an accurate estimate of the revenue in the marketplace, and these things have consequences, and that's why we're talking about them. So you're really it's a podcast if it's on demand audio. It doesn't matter what length it is. Would you say that an audio book is a podcast?
No, an audio book is a book. And that's why we have that word too.
What makes it a book? It was published?
It really, I think, speaks to length. right? Like, what, it's not an audiobook. You wouldn't break up into episodes in theory. I get that people will do anything, but like an audiobook is a single episode for that book, right? A single file for that book, even
Well,
if they break it up.
so is a podcast a series?
Yes,
And okay, I think that's an important word in this. Is this show a podcast or is it a
100%.
video? But is it a video podcast or is it a podcast? We don't have very good. We put it on YouTube. We don't see a lot of consumption there. That's largely just kind of we haven't gotten around to marketing that yet. But it is what it is. But here we are looking at each other into screens and posting it for the world to see. So are we a video podcast or a podcast?
I mean, yes, I think you can be both. It's interesting to me when I think the video version is a video podcast, but since many people are choosing to experience this as audio, they're listening to a podcast. They're not listening, in this case, they're not listening to the audio of a video podcast, in my opinion, because we would be having the same conversation the same way, even if you didn't release the video component.
Correct.
There are some shows that do a video podcast where the video is, everybody has to be camera ready. And I mean, listen, I was I work on a treadmill desk that I'm standing stationary on right now, so I have my emergency button downs for video calls that are right over there, but I don't wear them when I'm walking.
Emergency
But
button.
I put that on because I knew we were recording. But otherwise, it's exactly the same recording we would have done uh, if we weren't releasing a video component. There's this, every single major company, and we referenced them all a couple of times, is really worried right now. Are they missing the boat on video podcasts? And sometimes you'll see even folks who you and I both trust in the space talk about the vast majority of podcast consumption is now happening on YouTube. I'm here to tell you, and they can all come at me, it's not true. When you look at any big show you would think of first and foremost as an audio podcast that also releases a component on YouTube, you can see the numbers. If you work at the hosting companies or if you're part of that show, you can literally see the numbers, but you can see the tiny numbers on YouTube, even if they're getting tens of thousands of views on YouTube, and see what their minimum guarantee deals were, their $100+ million deals, and know that the audio version must be dwarfing it. If people are self-reporting and don't know the terminology and they say, oh yeah, I do all my podcast stuff on YouTube, it's the same way that years before any podcast listening was happening on Spotify, we would get some reports that were, again, survey based, where they would say, oh yeah, most podcast listening is happening on Spotify. For the vast majority of shows today, that's still not true. You can still see that Apple represents half or close to half of their listening versus Spotify representing maybe about 25%. And so now we're doing the same dance, but with YouTube. Most of the consumption is happening on YouTube.
By the way, this
not.
is like borderline conspiratorial. I've not heard anyone come forth and challenge that it doesn't now go YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and you're saying
Talk.
what?
It's crazy
So
talk.
so yeah,
And
no.
every single
Talk to
hosting
me.
company could dissuade you of this. And I think that if you pushed and asked, if you asked SiriusXM, break down the Wondery numbers, break down the smart list numbers for me, or if you asked any of these networks that have shows that are distributed in both places, it's clear. And maybe you on the buy side get to see it in a way that some folks don't. But we know because they've reported publicly that certain shows are doing tens of millions of listens a month or downloads a month. You can look at YouTube and see the numbers, which are public, and see it doesn't add up to anywhere close to that for most shows. Again, there are exceptions. We've talked about Joe Rogan before. I don't like talking about him, but he is an exception. And he's the reason that other Lex Friedman has any audience at all, by the way. It's because of him. So that's part of my dislike. Not all.
Yeah, but you could say that about Oprah and Dr. Phil, and
also true.
There's a bunch of famous people that we know. Dr. Oz, I think. Anyway,
yes,
but it's about platforms,
right? But so my point really is, yeah, I think a whole lot of people enjoy Rogan as a YouTube podcast, and then there are YouTubers who then say, I'll release this as audio as well, and they might have a bigger audience on YouTube. But the vast majority of what I think you and I and most listeners think of when they hear podcasts or when they think about podcasts, the vast majority of their consumption is Apple, then Spotify, and then probably YouTube in third.
Okay, so when you talk about a YouTuber, is a YouTuber a video podcaster?
I generally don't think so. I would really only consider you a video podcaster if you're taking the audio from that video and releasing it as an audio podcast. If they're doing that, then I will grant them that, okay, now they're video podcasting.
But if you don't mess with the RSS, you are not qualified. We do not get to co-opt this constituency.
I mean, again, they can use it however they want to use the word. I wouldn't use it that way. I think that at that point, they're using the term podcast because they don't know what else to call themselves. Are they a YouTube series? Are they a YouTube show? Mm-hmm. There's no great word for it. So podcast is at least a word that has some agency right now. So yeah. I get why people would want to use it.
All right, we're coming to the end of our time here, and I want to really focus on a few key issues. So you made a statement earlier that you don't think it's going away, and there's too much branding. And there's a lot of companies, the Podlexings of the world, who used pod in their name. How many businesses anchored around the
Way
word?
too many.
Probably so. But this is consequential when people are trying to steer that away. Somebody, I don't know if you saw this article, somebody says Joe Rogan's not a podcast. People are saying, well, let's call it simulcast, let's call it a show, let's call it a vodcast. I mean, are you just like
I shake my head and laugh at all those conversations because people are going to call it what they call it.
inconceivable, right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
they're
I mean, uh, making up a brand new word won't work unless everybody starts to use it.
right.
Like calling it Apple really made a push, and almost everybody else followed suit, that you follow a podcast, you don't subscribe to it. A whole lot of podcast listeners still talk about subscribing. A whole lot of podcast hosts still talk about subscribing, unless they get the message from Apple. No, say follow. Because Apple's research showed that people thought that subscribing meant you had to pay for it. And they wanted to distinguish that between the shows you can pay for. There's debate about whether, if it's only available on Spotify, is it a podcast, or if you have to pay for it as a podcast. It's what people call it. If people think of subscribable audio, on-demand audio as a podcast, that's what they're going to call it, and that's what it is. The other stuff, again, I don't mind if we acoustic guitar it and call it a video podcast. I don't mind the term vodcast, but
I do.
I mean, I think it sounds silly, but
Vlog.
right. But I appreciate the struggle that YouTubers especially have, because they're building something that nobody has agreed exactly on what the name is. There are YouTubers
Right.
who I follow who are not podcasters,
and are they identifying as podcasters? Because
No.
many are. I mean, there's no rules. But okay, so this is sort of interesting, and I think the pivot that's coming out of this conversation is that I hear you saying, look, the dividing line is whether you call yourself a video podcast or a podcast. If you're going to claim the word podcasting, which is not going away, it must be an on-demand series that is distributed through an audio-only platform, even if there's video somewhere else. And I think that's a very interesting distinction that you've kind of brought to the conversation here. I've not heard that, but I think there's a lot of viability in it.
I'll add, I fully know I'm being a cranky old man when I say it, because my personal requirement that you've got to have an audio only version of that show for it to qualify as a podcast. There are video podcasters who would not agree with me, and they have a reasonable argument, but that's not how I would use the word.
Yeah. Final piece of feedback here. Now that you are in the consulting business, what advice do you have for those of us that believe we work in or partly in the podcast industry relative to all these changes that are happening? What's your rant?
My rant is this. I didn't know that this was going to be it, but I know it is now. My entire tenure in this industry has been characterized by folks on the business side apologizing for things about the space. We accepted or even embraced, it's the wild, wild west in podcasting for years. And people still refer to it that way because there wasn't an IAB standard, or we didn't all count downloads the same way.
Is there an IAB standard?
Yeah. There is. It's implemented differently different places, but we spent a lot of time apologizing for that. We apologize for saying, hey, we can only report on downloads. We can't report on listens. We apologize for how release schedules work. We apologize for the existence of dynamic ad insertion. There's nothing to apologize for. This is what it is. This is podcasting. And podcasting is unique in that there's a really nice way that we can literally deliver episodes with ads bundled right into them to people who are opting in to listen to them. It's pretty magical, right? It's the closest thing to me that appointment watching sitcom television was in the 90s, where you could know people were going to be sitting there watching and they were going to see all those ads because they wanted to see how that episode of Friends ended. And that's what we have with podcasting now. Stop apologizing for it. So my advice, my rant, is that people have to stop apologizing for podcasting being what podcasting is, because it's clearly working.
Here. Lex, I'm so glad that we had this show to give us an excuse to talk to each other.
Same.
I miss you. I care about you. And I'm very, very excited for the fact that I feel like you've gotten out from under this thing a little bit and you've gotten control of your time back. So I'm glad to see you. And it seems like everything's going great. And I hope a lot of people reach out to you to get more of your insights applied to their business.
I appreciate that. Congratulations to you on all your success. It's very impressive to watch. I can't believe you're still part of a giant company. I had to give it up, but I'm proud of you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. One day at a time. So thank you to you, and thank you to everyone who has listened and potentially watched. In theory, you could have watched this.
We're both having good hair days.
We're having great hair days, and Lex put on his emergency shirt. I wore, the kind of standard. But anyway, it's good if you listen or if you don't. Thanks for being part of the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road and Veritone One until we combine the names. And look, we believe in this medium and we want you to be a part of it. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, go to oxfordroad.com and subscribe to the weekly newsletter, The Influencer. It's free. Lex loves it. Everybody loves it. Everybody says it's fantastic. And if you have feedback for us, good, bad, or otherwise, we like it. It's the breakfast of champions. Email us, info@mediaroundtable.com. Check out Ad Infinitum, which is our creative-focused podcast. And special thanks to not only Lex, but Haley, Ruby, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neil, Sean, and the team at Podcast One. Everybody that's working so hard for this. As always, influence responsibly. That was another conversation from our full series, What's a Podcast? And whether you're a podcaster, an advertiser, or somebody who just cares about this space, I hope this stretched you. It's certainly stretched me and is giving us a lot to think about in how we want to live going forward and protect and preserve the essence of the medium while preparing for the changes we need to make to evolve on the road ahead. If you want to hear the full limited 3-part docuseries, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined. Check it out wherever you listen to your shows. But if you want to go beyond that and you want to be a part of the movement that we've got here, it's not just about our defining it. It's about figuring out a path forward. Go to our link in the show description and download our free white paper, What is a Podcast? That has research from over 4,000 Americans on what consumers believe that the industry is. And make sure you sign our petition, also available in the link in the show description, to keep podcasting open. You know, this show is not just about content, learning, or entertainment. This is about having a real effect in the real world on issues that are important to all of us. We hope you'll continue to be a part of it and bring this into real life. Go to oxfordroad.com for more resources or click the links in the show description. Thanks for your time.